of Deuteronomy, chapter 18. Deuteronomy, chapter 18. Deuteronomy is the last book of the Pentateuch, the Torah, and in Hebrew we call Deuteronomy Devarim, the things which God spoke to Moses. Its English name comes from a reiteration of the law, Deuteronomos in Greek. And in chapter 18, we read what the rabbis tell us is a messianic prophecy. In chapter 18 of the book of Deuteronomy, we read the following. In verse 18, Moses is told by God that I will raise up a prophet from among their countrymen like you, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I command him. And it shall come about that whoever will not listen to my words, which he shall speak in my name, I myself will require it of him. But the prophet who shall speak a word presumptuously in my name, which I have not commanded him to speak, or which he shall speak in the name of other gods, that prophet shall die. And you may now say in your heart, how shall we know the word which the Lord has not spoken? When a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if the thing does not come about or come true, that is the thing which the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously. You shall not be afraid of him. The rabbis agreed that this was a messianic prophecy. It was a prophecy about the Messiah. In fact, as late as the 14th century, a famous rabbi called Ralbag specifically said it was about the Messiah. So does the Midrash Tanhuma and the Targum Yonatan. Deuteronomy 18 is about the Messiah according to the rabbinic literature. It is something that Jews and Christians agree upon. Now let me deal with the Christians first, because this particular passage creates problems for both some Christians and some Jews. We are given the test of a false prophet, people who predict things in the name of the Lord that fail to happen. It is no secret that we have quite a list of people who've predicted things falsely, claiming to be speaking for God. The Hebrew prophet Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu Hanavi, said that such people counsel rebellion against the Lord. They prophesy from the futility and deception of their own mind. And in fact, ancient Israel was to stone such people. Now we are under grace, not the law, but it doesn't make them any less a false prophet. John Wimber, the late John Wimber, distorted 1 Corinthians chapter 13 out of all context, where it says we prophesy in parts. To him it meant you could be part right and part wrong in what you prophesy. You know, before I was a Christian, I lived in New York, but I used to visit a witch in New Jersey who read tarot cards. She was a clairvoyant with a familiar spirit. And she saw in the tarot cards that I was going to become a believer in Jesus. And she began to go crazy with the cards. Don't come back and burn me. Don't come back and burn me when this happens to you. That witch had a track record, but she was never 100% right. But she was very often devastatingly right. In fact, her track record is far superior, percentage-wise, to many people who claim that they are prophets in the Church of Jesus Christ today. It's absurd. By false prophets, I don't simply mean people who predict things that didn't happen, who do not call themselves born again. Joseph Smith of the Mormons was a false prophet. Brigham Young of the Mormons was a false prophet. They prophesied things that indeed failed to happen. But what about people who say they are born again? To name but a few, Benny Hinn, Rick Joyner, Gerald Coates, Kenneth Copeland, and a host of others have made major prophetic predictions in the name of the Lord that failed to happen. Worst among these were Mike Bickle and the Kansas City Prophets, for instance. In October of 1990, they said the greatest revival was going to come to Great Britain. They prophesied that in August of 1990, a few months earlier. Well, since October of 1990, that is now 12 years on. More mosques have been built in Britain than churches. There's been no revival. Nothing happened in October of that year. These men prophesied falsely. Quite interesting. Yet in defense of their false prophecies, someone called Rick Joyner made the statement that prophesying falsely and making a prediction that doesn't happen doesn't mean you're a false prophet. because then no one would have the faith or be able to prophesy. Well, precisely. It says in Romans, you need the faith to prophesy. If you're not sure it's from God, you shouldn't say it. And if you do say it and it doesn't happen, you're a false prophet. You're not a real prophet. You have to be ignored and rejected as a prophet by the church. Yet Mr. Joyner himself wrote a book called The Harvest, in which he prophesied in the name of the Lord that God showed him that communism would be triumphant, that it would take over most of the developing world and some of the developed world. 6 months later, the Iron Curtain came down and the Soviet Empire went into disintegration. I've been to communist China. There's nothing communist about communist China. There are Pepsi Cola advertisements on the toll booths. Communism is disintegrated. Yet, Mr. Joyner then wrote another book claiming to have some kind of a rapture experience where he said the lowest person in heaven was the person who criticized his ministry. In other words, he can prophesy falsely, and if you point out that he prophesied falsely, you're going to have the lowest place in heaven. Mr. Joyner said it's a mistake to say, as Deuteronomy 18 does, that if you predict something in the name of the Lord that fails to happen, you're a false prophet. Now, he gives no biblical text or biblical reason or biblical proof to say it's wrong to say that someone who predicts something that doesn't happen is a false prophet. He just says it's wrong. Deuteronomy 18, however, the Word of God, says precisely that Rick Joyner and men like him are the very false prophets Jesus warned would come in the last days to deceive. We can document tremendous false predictions made in the name of the Lord by men like Benny Hinn, Kenneth Copeland, and others. But these things don't happen. They're obviously the men that Jesus warned would come in his name. That concerns Christians, however. Let's look at this text in its original context concerning the one Jewish people call Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses. The rabbis agree in the Talmud this is about the Messiah. You know, the late Lubavitch rabbi, leader of the Chabad movement, Menachem Schneerson, prophesied that the Messiah would come by Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, in 1991, following the war in the Gulf. Well, the Messiah didn't come, and Menachem Schneerson has since died. I went down to the Stamford Hill area of North London where the Hasidic Jews live, just opposite the Chabad Center, their main office in the UK. And I said to them, with a few friends, Atem Shomerim HaTorah? Do you keep the Torah? In fact, I called up the previous day, and I said to them in Hebrew, Nu, what? So what? And they said, what's your question in Hebrew? They asked me. They said, Ken? And I asked them in Hebrew, אני מחכה למשיח. אני אמרתי לכל העברים שלי שמהי יצטרך לבוא לפני החג. I told all my friends the Messiah was coming before the holiday. Your rabbi told me. לפי רב שניאסון, המשיח יצטרך לבוא כבר. The Messiah needed to come already. Deuteronomy 18 says if the Messiah didn't come, he's a neve sheker, a false prophet. So I went down to Stamford Hill with my friends, and out came one of the rabbis of the Lubavitch movement. The senior rabbi is called the Rebbe, the Tzaddik. He was Rabbi Schneerson. But another rabbi came out named Rabbi Sufrin. And he was very angry at me. And I said to him, Ata shomer et Torah? Do you keep the Torah? Well, Deuteronomy 18 says, if you keep the Torah, take Rabbi Schneerson out and stone him. You have to kill him. He prophesied falsely in the name of Hashem. The Messiah didn't come. Where's the messianic redemption? I said to him, you keep the Torah. And quite a crowd was now listening. Now, the different Hasidic sects fight with each other, arguing over whose Rebbe is the real reincarnation of Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, which came down through Rabbi Isaac Luria. Quite a mess they had. Some of the other Hasidic sects don't like the Lubavitch, and vice versa, particularly the Satmar and Nutarai Karda, they don't like each other. So I said again, you have to keep the Torah, take Rabbi Schneerson out and kill him. Now for me, for us, the Messiah came, he fulfilled the Torah. I don't have to kill Rabbi Schneerson. If he repents, he can accept the Messiah, Yeshua, and be saved. we don't have to stone him to death. But if you want to live by the Torah, take your Rebbe out and kill him. That's what the Torah says. He couldn't argue from the Torah. He could just argue. He took it personally. I said, I'm only upholding the Torah. Now, either the Torah is fulfilled or you have to keep it. If you have to keep it, take him out and kill him. He had quite a problem. Meanwhile, Rabbi Schneerson died and he's buried in New York. He died on Ocean Parkway in Brooklyn. Never set a foot in Israel, but his followers built a replica of his brownstone in Brooklyn, in Jerusalem, near Jerusalem, on the highway between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, in case he decides to show up. They now have posters all over Israel and all over the world with Rabbi Schneerson, his picture on it, saying Melech Moshiach, King Messiah. Rabbi Schneerson is the king and the Messiah? Now the Hasidim have a problem. Their Rebbe, their tzaddik, is a dynasty, again coming down from Baal Shem Tov, who they call the Beshk. It goes through the son, and if there's no son, the rabbi who's the son-in-law, but he had neither. To them, you go to God through the Rebbe, the tzaddik. He goes to God directly. He has a kind of Jewish nasos. He has the spirit of the Beshk, of Baal Shem Tov. Therefore, he can go to God through the Torah. You have to go to God through him, like a guru. Or very similar in many ways to the Roman Catholic Church. You have to go through a man. Well, they're in crisis. They have no Rebbe because he had no son and he had no son-in-law. But they're saying he's the Messiah, this dead rabbi who's buried in New York. And they have a table in the departure lounge of Ben Gurion Airport near Tel Aviv, Lod Airport, and they try to get Jewish people to put on tefillin and make the Hebrew prayers. And I looked at their poster. I didn't tell them my mother's Gentile. Didn't tell them. I just spoke to them in Hebrew, and I said to them, Nu matem osim akshav, who met en lehem shum Rebbe. What are you going to do right now? He's dead and you have no rabbi. Hu melech Mashiach hu bekever shelo. He's the King Messiah, but he's in his grave. And this Orthodox Jew, another rabbi from that movement, said to me, Hu yakum mehametim. Ma? Hu yakum mehametim. He's going to raise from the dead. So I said to him in Hebrew, let me get this straight. You believe that the Jewish Messiah had to come, then he had to die, and then he has to raise from the dead. Ken, yes. That's all I wanted to know. At least we agree on something. You're right. The Jewish Messiah did have to come, did have to die, and did have to raise from the dead. Only the prophet Daniel said he had to come and die before the second temple would be destroyed in Shavi Maharei Asvirah, 70 AD. And the Messiah is a prophet like Moses. Did Moses ever predict something that didn't happen? Well, either did the true Messiah. The Messiah would be a prophet like Moses. Let's begin to understand how. We are told in the book of Exodus, Shemot, that it was a Pharaoh who did not know Joseph, who was the anti-Semite, who hated the Jews. Gentiles, non-Jews, will either be predisposed towards philo-Semitism or anti-Semitism. Now in Judaism we have two pictures of the Messiah, Hamashiach ben Yosef and Hamashiach ben David, Messiah son of Joseph and Messiah son of David. Joseph, in the book of Genesis, Breshit, prefigures the Messiah. The rabbis admit this. It was a Pharaoh who didn't know Joseph, who turned against the Jews. And so it is Gentiles who don't know the son of Joseph, Jesus, will turn against the Jews. Gentiles who knew Joseph were predisposed to philo-Semitism, loving the Jews. Gentiles who didn't know Joseph were predisposed to being anti-Semitic, and so it is to this day. The government of Israel knows very well that the only real friend Israel and the Jews have at this age of growing anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are evangelical Christians, born-again Christians, mainly in the United States, but also in the other English-speaking democracies. They know this. Why do these Christians, why do these Gentiles love and support Israel in the face of growing anti-Semitism in the face of incredible media bias against Israel. Why? Because they know the son of Joseph. Ben David, Yeshua Bar Yosef. That was Jesus' real name. Rabbi Yeshua Bar Yosef Minet said it. They're Israel's only real friends. Because they know the son of Joseph, they will favor Israel and the Jews for his sake. They will love his people. It's impossible to love Jesus Christ and hate his people. It's impossible to love Jesus Christ and hate his country. He's a Jew. And he's coming back as King of the Jews. The question is, why is it that so many of our Jewish friends don't believe him? Well, the reason they don't believe him is because they don't believe Moses and the Torah. Yeshua said in Bisorah Bel Pei Yochanan Perek Hey, the Gospel of the Apostle John, chapter 5, if you believed Moses, you'd believe me also. If they really believed the Torah, if they believed the Tanakh, if they believed Moses and the prophets, they would know he is the promised Messiah. And so it begins. A prophet like Moses. We read in the book of Exodus, chapter 1, Shemot Perek Aleph, verses 15 to 16, about the Hebrew midwives. Moses was protected from a wicked king in his infancy and hid for a season in Egypt. Moses was protected through the faith of his parents in his infancy from a wicked king and was protected for a season in Egypt. And so Yeshua, Rabbi Yeshua, Bar Yosef Minet said it, Jesus of Nazareth, was protected by the faith of his parents from a wicked king called Herod and found protection for a season in Egypt, according to Besorah Bel Pei Lucas, the Gospel of St. Luke, chapter 2. And it continues. Jesus was endowed with wisdom and understanding. 3 days in the temple, he knew the Midrashim, and he impressed the Sanhedrin and the Jewish scholars. He could answer their questions even from his youth. He was endowed with supernatural wisdom. Moses was in many respects a little different. Moses, however, was first groomed in the wisdom of Egypt before he was groomed in the wisdom of God. Now, Islam takes Deuteronomy 18 and says it is not about Jesus, it is rather about Muhammad. Rather about Muhammad. Muhammad is the founder of a religion that has rarely done anything other than advocate the persecution of both Jews and Christians to this very day, to this very hour. Muhammad, the one they say is the prophet, and I'm not against Arab people by any means. Like the Jews, they are descendants of Abraham, anthropologically. Muhammad was the son-in-law of Abu Bakr. He married Aisha when she was 6 years old and took her virginity at the age of 9. This is something that we call pedophilia. I'm expected to believe that the prophet of God, who'd be like Moses in Deuteronomy 18, was a pedophile who had sex with a 9-year-old girl? I don't think so. Muhammad could not have been the prophet like Moses. In fact, the last thing it says in the Brit HaDashah, the New Testament, is don't add to it. There's a curse on anyone who dares add to it. It's the end. Yet Islam teaches that Muhammad was given another testament. God would never tell people to add to something he said don't add to. It just doesn't make sense. But let's continue. A prophet like Moses. Moses was a man of privilege, power, and position, a prince in Egypt. Yeshua was a person of power, privilege, and position. Moses freely chose to turn his back on that privilege and position and suffer reproach with the people of God, looking to a greater reward. As we read in the epistle to the Hebrews, Ha'igeret La'ivrim, something written to Messianic Jews, written to Jews who believed he was the Messiah in the first century. We read that Moses in chapter 11, verse 26, considered the reproach of the Messiah greater riches than the treasuries of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. Moses could have had it quite good, but he chose to suffer reproach with the people of God. And so Yeshua, who had fellowship with the Father before the creation of the world, could have had it quite good, but he chose to suffer reproach. Now, this idea of the Messiah being pre-existent is not a Christian invention. In fact, even that same Baal Shem Tov, it is claimed by his followers, did some kind of a Jewish astral projection and went to heaven and saw the Messiah already in eternity studying Torah. It is not a Christian concept. It is a concept held by the Jews that the Messiah is pre-existent. Messiah left a position of privilege and power and came to earth. Let's continue. Moses married a Gentile woman, specifically a woman of dark complexion, and dwelt in Midian. He married a Gentile woman. In the book of Ruth, we read the story of a rich, powerful Jewish man, Boaz, who took a Gentile wife, Ruth, and so began the lineage of David from where the Messiah would come. Why does the lineage of David that would produce the Messiah have to be the union between a Jew and a Gentile? Because the Messiah would be the Shoresh Ishai, the root of Jesse, according to Isaiah 11. The Messiah would have to come through a marriage of Jew and Gentile, as King David did, because the Messiah of the Jews would be the Savior of both Jew and Gentile. No, Jewish people do not come to believe in a Gentile religion. Gentiles come to believe in a Jewish faith, a Jewish Messiah, a Jewish book. Convert? Gentiles convert when they accept the Jewish Messiah. They stop being Muslims. They stop being Hindus. They stop being anti-Semites. But a Jew does not convert. A Jew makes teshuvah. He turns from sin towards God, accepting God's provision, kaporah, atonement for sin. The Messiah was to be a korban, known as Ben Ephraim, even in the rabbinic literature, the suffering servant of Isaiah chapter 52 and 53. Later on, Rashi would say that Israel is the suffering servant. Well, if this was a suffering servant who did no wrong according to Ishayahu, according to Isaiah, and that same prophet Isaiah castigated Israel for its sin. Before the Middle Ages, before Rashi, the rabbis didn't believe it was the Jewish people who would suffer vicariously for the nations. In fact, Eliezer HaKalir included Isaiah 52 and 53 in the Machzor for Yom Kippur, in the synagogue liturgy for the Jewish Day of Atonement. This would be the suffering servant, the Messiah. Who said so? Christians? No. Sanhedrin 92b said so. Yalkut, volume 2 said so. The Midrash on Shmuel said so in the Lemberg edition. The Targum on the Kingdom of Messiah said so in the Targum Yonatan. Rabbi Moses Alshek said, all the sages agree that Isaiah 52 and 53 is about the Messiah. And so the Messiah suffers for the iniquity of the people. The older and more authoritative sages agreed this was about the Messiah who would suffer vicariously for the people. Gentiles accept God's Jewish provision. There's only one God. It's not the God of the Norwegians. He was Odin. It's not the God of the Greeks. He was Zeus. It's not the God of any nation or any people. The only God is the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's Gentiles who've come to faith in a Jewish God. It's not Jews who come to faith in a Gentile one. There wasn't a goyish bone in his body. But let's continue even further. So Moses takes a Gentile bride. You know, the New Testament compares the church to the bride of Christ, the bride of Messiah. Now, Jewish people will often find the word Christ a Christian term. That's logical. Except it was not invented by Christians. That term was invented by Jews from the Greek word anointed one, Moshiach. The word Christos is found in the Septuagint. It was Jews who gave us the term Christ. Moses takes a Gentile bride, and in figure, so does the Messiah. Moses was willing to dwell with man, as the Messiah was. This idea of the Messiah being smitten, why? Because he's a prophet like Moses. In the book of Exodus, chapter 32, verse 31, we read the following. Then Moses returned to the Lord and said, Alas, this people has committed a great sin, and they have made a god of gold for themselves. But now, if thou wilt forgive their sin, and if not, please blot me out from thy book which thou hast written. Moses was willing to be judged and accursed on behalf of the people of God. And so Yeshua, Jesus, was willing to be judged and accursed vicariously on behalf of the people of God. Moses begged God to forgive them. And so Jesus, in Luke 23:24, begged God to forgive them. In the book of Exodus, chapter 34, verse 28, we read that Moses fasted 40 days and 40 nights. Moses fasted 40 days and 40 nights. And so in Matthew chapter 4, verse 2, Habesorah berpei Matityahu, Perek Dalet, Psuk Stein, Yeshua fasted 40 days and 40 nights. In Deuteronomy chapter 34, verse 10, we read that no prophet had ever risen like Moses. No prophet had ever risen like Moses. And the Jews of Jesus' own day admitted no man ever spoke like this. Now, that's not only the New Testament record. You know, in the Avodat Zerah, the tractate Avodat Zerah, the rabbis admitted that Yeshua did miracles as no other rabbi, that his disciples did miracles in his name, including healing the sick and raising the dead, and that he was crucified at Pesach, Passover, that he rose from the dead and then ascended to heaven from the Mount of Olives. Does it say that in the New Testament? Yes. But I was not quoting from the New Testament. I was quoting from the Avodat Zerah. The Avodat Zerah was not written by Jewish apostles who believed he was the Messiah. It was written by rabbis who claimed that they didn't. It's one thing when your followers say these things are true. It's another thing when your opponents say it also. That was not written by Jews who believed in him. That was written by Jews who claimed they didn't and were trying to persuade others not to. Yet both the Roman government who persecuted the early Christians and the rabbinic establishment both agreed he rose from the dead, to the point that the rabbis agreed not only did he do miracles, and there had been none like him, but his disciples did those in his name, and then after being crucified at Pesach, he rose from the dead and ascended to heaven from the Mount of Olives. I'm not quoting from the New Testament, although that is in the New Testament. I'm quoting from the Avodat Zerah. Read it for yourself. And more than that, Daniel said the Messiah would have to come and die before the second temple would be destroyed. You know, I'm often reminded of the story of Rabbi Leopold Cohen. He'd been the victim of tremendous anti-Semitism perpetrated by false Christians, mainly Roman Catholics in Eastern Europe. He, his family, his community had known nothing but suffering because of the name of Jesus. When given a New Testament, he threw it, and it remained in the corner on back of a piece of furniture for some years. But for some inexplicable reason, at some future point, he picked it up and began to read it, thinking it was filled with anti-Semitic nuances and references. He was astounded that Yeshua, Jesus said, I came but for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Then he began to read even further. What did the prophets say about the Messiah? Why have our people rejected this Jesus, as the Gentiles call him? Going to Daniel 9, he read how the Messiah would have to come and die before the second temple would be destroyed. So he went to the Talmudic references. The first thing he encountered was a warning that there's a curse on anyone who reads Daniel 9. Why? For the time of the Messiah's coming is prophesied in it. He couldn't believe that the ancient sages were telling Jews not to read a passage from the prophets because the Messiah's time of coming was predicted in it. But then he read further. According to the Midrash Breshit, and I'm just reading from page 243 of the Warsaw edition, the Messiah was to exit in 33 AD, according to the Midrash Breshit. According to the Yalkut, volume 2, on page 79d, Nazir edition, and also 32b, this is about the Messiah. The Messiah. That's what the rabbis said. Not just a Christian interpretation. That's the Jewish interpretation. The Messiah had to come and willingly take the sin of God's people and be blotted out on their behalf. But let's continue. No man had seen God. Moses revealed God and God's name to the people. And so we read in the Gospel of St. John, chapter 1, verse 18. No man had seen God, but Jesus, of course, revealed God's name to the people. Hashem. When the Shekinah, the glory of God, came on Moses in the book of Exodus, chapter 34, verse 35, the people asked him to replace the veil. They couldn't behold the glory reflecting from his face. And so in Matthew chapter 17, verse 2, the glory of God, that same Shekinah glory, was reflected from the face of the Lord Jesus. Moses spoke to God, and God spoke to Moses directly. And the people heard it. And so when Jesus spoke to God, the Father spoke to Jesus directly. And the people heard it. When Moses died, we're told in Jude chapter 9, Yehudah Perek Tesha, that an angel guarded his tomb up on Har Navo, Mount Nebo. And so in the Gospel of St. Matthew chapter 28, angels guarded the tomb of Jesus, rolled away the stone. Jesus, in fact, appeared with Moses and Elijah at his transfiguration. But the story then continues. Moses fed God's people supernaturally in a barren place. According to the book of Exodus, chapter 16, verses 14 and 15, manna fell from heaven. Moses fed God's people supernaturally in a barren place. And so in Matthew chapter 14, verses 19 to 21, the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, the 12 baskets, Jesus fed a large number supernaturally in a barren place. In Exodus Perek Gimel, Shemot Perek Gimel, Moses brought deliverance to God's people. And so Jesus brings deliverance to God's people. Rabbi Shaul of Tarsus, who the Gentiles call Paul the Apostle, tells us in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 1 to 4, that our fathers were baptized in Moses and the cloud. You see, as Moses made a covenant with blood and sprinkled it on the people and brought the people out of Egypt through the water into the promised land, is the way the Messiah would cover the sins of the people with blood, of whom the Passover lamb was a shadow, and bring God's people out of Egypt through the water, that is baptism, into the promised land. No, baptism is not a Christian ritual. Yochanan HaMatbil, John the Baptist, was doing it long before Christians came along. The Essenes were doing it long before Christians came along. Even to this day, you have the rite of mikveh. Orthodox Jews have always done it. But let's continue. Moses indeed took blood and sprinkled it on the people. Moses gave a covenant, or God gave a covenant, what we say in Hebrew, laktok brit, to cut a covenant. A covenant was given, sealed with blood, through Moses. And so, in Matthew chapter 26, verses 26 to 28, a new covenant sealed with blood was given through the prophet like Moses, Yeshua. Now, some people have a problem with the fact that Yeshua was fully human and fully divine. Well, you know, Hasidic Jews don't have that problem. Just read their teaching on the Metatron. If you're an Orthodox Jew and you want to hear our tape on the Metatron, read it yourself. The idea of God becoming a man is in no sense alien to Jewish thought. Your own sages and your own mystics agreed. Indeed, Jacob wrestled with Hamelach Adonai, the angel of the Lord, and in fleshment of God himself, he saw the face of the Lord. But let's continue beyond this. A new covenant? Where do you get this new covenant? You Christians invented this idea of a new covenant. Brit HaDashah, another Torah, a new Torah. No, Christians did not invent it. The Messiah would be a prophet like Moshe Rabbeinu. Moses gave a covenant, so the Messiah must give a covenant that fulfills the Torah of Moses. It is the prophet Jeremiah who said, words to the effect, Ani yaktog brit hadashah and bet Yehuda gam bet Yisrael lo kamocha brit shenitakti im avotchem. I will make, literally, I will cut a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. A new covenant, a new testament will be made with the Jews, not like the one I made with their fathers. Yirmiyahu Hanavi, Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 31. Jeremiah was not a Baptist. He was not a Pentecostal. He was not a Protestant. The Hebrew prophet Jeremiah was just that, a Hebrew. And he said there would be a new testament, a new covenant when the Messiah came. And he had to come before the second temple was destroyed. This covenant would be a covenant to salvation that would make the Gentile nations believe in the Jewish God. As Isaiah wrote, the nations will resort to the Shoresh Yishai, the Goyim, and to him shall be the obedience of the Amim, the peoples. Why are the people in the Philippines worshippers of the Jewish God? Why are people in Brazil worshippers of the Jewish God? Why are people in Finnish the worshippers of the Jewish God? Why are there so many Christians in China? Why should all these great nations and great peoples worship the God of a little nation that was always persecuted and despised? There's only one reason that Gentiles would worship the Jewish God. Because Isaiah said the Messiah would make them worship the Jewish God. The Messiah would be a prophet like Moses, who'd give a new covenant. But you know, the first time Moses came to save Israel, he was rejected. And he went to Midian and dwelt with the Gentiles. The Gentiles accepted him when his own people rejected him. When he came the first time, his own people, the Hebrews, rejected him. The Gentiles accepted him. And so it is with Rabbi Yeshua Bar Yosef Minetzeret. Ben David Yeshua, Jesus of Nazareth, if you will. The first time he, a prophet like Moses, came to save his people, they rejected him. It was rather the Norwegians and the Brazilians and the Filipinos who accepted him. The Gentiles accepted him when his own people didn't. Why? Because he's a prophet like Moses. But the second time, they accept him. You know, the only reason there's a New Testament is because Jews wrote it. Every writer of the New Testament was a Jew except Luke, who was a Gentile convert to Judaism. Why did Gentiles believe in the gospel? Because Jews taught them to believe in the gospel. Why did Gentiles believe Jesus is the Messiah? Because Jews believed he was the Messiah. In fact, the Jewish historian Max Demont admitted that by the time of Bar Kokhba's rebellion in the 2nd century, in his famous book, God, the Jews and History, perhaps 25% of the Jews in Jerusalem believed he was the Messiah. And today we have tens of thousands of Jews in America, Australia, Britain, Russia, the Ukraine, South Africa, France, and Eretz Israel, who believe the same thing. The Messiah is a prophet like Moses. The Messiah has come. The New Testament teaches something in Romans chapter 11. It teaches us that the first Christians were Jews and the last Christians will be Jews. Remember, the word Christos was not invented by Gentiles. It comes from the Septuagint. It was a term used first by rabbis. His name was not Jesus Christ. His name was Rabbi Yeshua Bar Yosef Minetzeret, the prophet like Moses. The one who had to come and die before the second temple would be destroyed. The one whom the Talmud curses, yet the Avodat Zarah admits, rose from the dead and ascended to heaven from the Mount of Olives. The one that Rambam, Moses Maimonides, admitted came to make Gentiles worship the true God in Guide for the Perplexed. The one who was rejected by his own people and accepted by the Gentiles the first time. But they will believe him the second time. And that second time is coming. The Jewish people, including my own children, were born in Eretz Israel. They're being regathered there to await the return of the Messiah in what Jeremiah called Hatekufat Hatzarat Yaakov, the time of Jacob's trouble, the great tribulation. Yet in this tribulation there is salvation. There is Geulah. There is redemption. But the only redemption is the Messiah. And there is only one Messiah, the Jewish Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth, the one who gave the new covenant as Moses gave a covenant, the one who was protected in Egypt from a wicked king as Moses was protected in Egypt from a wicked king, the one whom the Gentiles accepted when his own people rejected him. There's only one Messiah, Yeshua, the prophet like Moses. God bless.